Imagine a single decision so powerful that it could shake the foundations of the mightiest empire in the world. A choice that, at first glance, seemed practical, even necessary, but in reality set into motion a chain of events that would drain the British Empire of its wealth, influence, and power. Today, we explore the story of one war loan that ultimately bankrupted Britain, and why this cautionary tale from history still resonates today. By the early 20th century, Britain had already endured centuries of global expansion. It ruled over vast territories across continents, commanded the world's largest navy, and boasted unparalleled economic strength. Yet, despite its outward appearance of invincibility, cracks were forming beneath the surface. Maintaining an empire of such scale required massive resources, both human and financial, and the outbreak of the First World War in 1914 brought these pressures to a critical point. Britain faced a dilemma: how to fund a war that was unprecedented in scale without collapsing its economy. Initially, the government relied on traditional means of raising funds. Taxes were increased, gold reserves were tapped, and the public was encouraged to contribute through patriotic war bonds. But these measures were never going to be enough. The costs of modern warfare, from industrialized weaponry to supporting millions of troops overseas, quickly escalated beyond imagination. By 1915, Britain faced a financial shortfall that threatened not just the war effort, but the very stability of its economy. Something drastic had to be done. Enter the war loan. At first, it was promoted as a straightforward solution. Britain would borrow vast sums of money from international creditors, primarily from the United States and a few other neutral nations, to sustain its military campaigns. On paper, it made sense. The loans were backed by the government, interest rates were reasonable, and Britain had a long-standing reputation for reliability. Investors saw it as a safe bet, and the money poured in. But here's where the story takes a dark turn. Unlike normal borrowing, this loan wasn't just a temporary measure, it became a long-term financial trap. To repay these massive debts, Britain had to divert enormous portions of its income from taxation and trade toward interest payments. Meanwhile, the war dragged on longer than anyone had anticipated, increasing costs even further. Every victory on the battlefield was overshadowed by the mounting financial burden back home. What makes this even more striking is how the loan's consequences rippled through the empire. Colonies that had once generated wealth for Britain now faced heavier taxation and stricter economic control to fund repayment. Domestic industries were overtaxed, wages were suppressed, and inflation began eroding the savings of ordinary citizens. The very people who had contributed to the war effort through patriotism now found themselves struggling under the weight of financial decisions made far above their heads. By the 1920s, the full impact of that single loan became undeniable. Britain, once the world's dominant economic power, was heavily indebted to foreign creditors. Its gold reserves were depleted, and its ability to influence global finance had diminished dramatically. The empire, which had seemed eternal, was now vulnerable. Countries that had previously relied on British loans and investments began to question the empire's stability, and Britain's once unassailable position in international affairs started to erode. Yet, it wasn't just the numbers on a balance sheet that told the story. The psychological effect on Britain's leadership and citizens was profound. The empire had survived countless wars, yet here it was, brought to the brink not by enemies on the battlefield, but by the invisible chains of debt. Confidence, both domestic and international, waned. Political debates became dominated by fiscal caution, and the ability to invest in new opportunities or respond to emerging threats was severely constrained. In essence, one war loan reshaped the trajectory of the British Empire. Now, consider the lessons hidden in this historical episode. It is tempting to assume that a strong nation can always borrow its way out of a crisis. Britain's reputation, military might, and economic influence made it seem almost untouchable. But history shows us that even the greatest powers are vulnerable to financial miscalculations. A decision that seems minor at the outset, a loan to fund a temporary need, can ripple through generations, constraining policy, undermining authority, and altering the course of empires. And here, that's a question worth pondering. How different would history have been if Britain had chosen another path? What if it had balanced immediate wartime needs with long-term fiscal responsibility? The empire might have maintained more autonomy in its economic decisions, invested in modernization instead of servicing debt, and preserved both global influence and domestic prosperity. Instead, that single war loan became a financial anchor, dragging down an empire that had once seemed untouchable. It's also fascinating to reflect on how this story mirrors situations today. Nations still face choices about borrowing, debt, and the balance between immediate needs and long-term stability. The British experience is a timeless reminder that fiscal decisions have consequences far beyond their initial context. History doesn't just record events, it offers a blueprint of cause and effect. And the story of that one war loan is a blueprint of caution. So, as we look back at the British Empire and the financial decisions that reshaped it, remember this: power and prestige can be fleeting when weighed against the invisible force of debt. That single loan was more than a financial instrument, it was a turning point. A lesson in prudence and a warning that even the strongest empires can fall when their finances are not managed with foresight. If there's one takeaway, it's this: history rewards those who understand the hidden costs of every decision, especially the financial ones. And for those of us watching and learning, the story of Britain's war loan offers insight not just into the past, but into how to approach challenges today, whether personal, professional, or national. Every choice has a ripple effect, and the choices we make now will shape the future in ways we may not immediately see. If you find these insights compelling, there's much more to uncover. History is full of hidden lessons, stories of empires rising and falling, and decisions that changed the world. Here at Silent Collapse, we dig into these moments, not just to tell the story, but to understand the forces at play and how they continue to affect our lives today. So stay with us, because the next story is even more astonishing and the lessons even more relevant. Because in the end, understanding the collapse of the past can give us the power to navigate the future with wisdom. And that's why history, finance, and strategy are not just academic. They are survival tools, whether you are running a nation, a business, or simply managing your own life. The British Empire might have been brought low by one war loan, but the lessons it left behind remain priceless. This version is designed to keep viewers engaged, with pacing, suspense, reflective questions, and a natural mentor-style tone. The CTA is subtle but encourages staying tuned for more content. If you want, I can also create a slightly tighter 12-14-minute spoken version, perfectly calibrated for AI voiceover pacing so it flows naturally and dramatically for your channel. Do you want me to do that next? Yes. Perfect. I'll create a polished spoken word version of your script, optimized for AI voiceover and a natural dramatic flow for your channel, Silent Collapse. I'll also tighten it for a 12-14-minute runtime, keeping suspense, pacing, and viewer retention high. Here's the revised version. Imagine a single decision so powerful that it shook the foundations of the mightiest empire in the world. At first, it seemed practical, even necessary, but in reality, it unleashed a chain reaction that drained Britain of wealth, influence, and power. This is the story of one war loan that bankrupted the British Empire, and why it still matters today. By the early 20th century, Britain ruled vast territories across continents. Its navy dominated the seas, and its economy was unmatched. On the surface, it seemed invincible, but maintaining an empire of this scale was costly. And when the First World War erupted in 1914, Britain faced an unprecedented financial crisis. Funding a global war wasn't just difficult, it was almost impossible. Initially, Britain relied on taxes, gold reserves, and patriotic war bonds. But the costs of industrialized warfare, millions of soldiers, massive armies, modern weapons, soon exceeded expectations. By 1915, traditional funding methods weren't enough. Something drastic had to be done. Enter the war loan. Britain borrowed vast sums from international creditors, mainly the United States. On paper, it looked safe. The loans were government-backed, interest rates reasonable, and Britain's reputation impeccable. Money flowed in. But the problem wasn't just the size of the loan, it was its long-term consequences. To repay these debts, Britain had to divert huge portions of income toward interest payments. The war dragged on, costs soared, and every battlefield victory was overshadowed by financial strain. Colonies faced higher taxes, domestic industry struggled, wages stagnated, and inflation eroded citizens' savings. The very people contributing to the war effort found themselves struggling under the invisible weight of debt. By the 1920s, the impact was undeniable. Britain was heavily indebted to foreign creditors, its gold reserves depleted, its global influence weakened. The empire, once untouchable, now appeared vulnerable. Countries that had once relied on British loans began questioning the empire's stability. Domestically, confidence waned. Political debates focused on fiscal caution, leaving little room for investment or modernization. The psychological toll was immense. Britain had survived countless wars, yet here it was, brought low not by enemies, but by financial decisions made far from the battlefield. One war loan reshaped the trajectory of an entire empire. The lesson is clear. Even the greatest powers are vulnerable to financial miscalculations. A decision that seems minor, a loan for immediate needs, can ripple across generations, constraining policy, undermining authority, and altering history. Think about it. What if Britain had balanced wartime needs with fiscal foresight? The empire might have retained autonomy in economic decisions, invested in modernization, and preserved both influence and prosperity. Instead, a single war loan became a financial anchor, dragging down a nation that once seemed untouchable. This story isn't just history. It's a warning. Nations today still face choices about debt and borrowing, weighing short-term needs against long-term stability. Britain's experience reminds us that power can be fleeting when weighed against invisible forces like debt. One decision, one loan, and an empire's trajectory can change forever. If there's one takeaway, it's this. Every choice has consequences, often unseen at first. Whether running a nation, a business, or simply your own finances, history teaches that prudent decisions are essential. Britain's war loan demonstrates the risks of ignoring this lesson.